Hello, everyone. Welcome. And we are thrilled that you could join us for today's session, which is Introduction into Devolution. I'm Kate Parkin, Senior Officer on the Peer Learning Programme, place-based, based here at Arts Council England. For the purposes of audio describing, I'm a midlife woman with a brown hair fringe and a black top and blue-green necklace. Today we'll be joined by Paul Bristow, Director of Strategic Partnerships at Arts Council England, and colleague Lee Hornsby, also Arts Council England. In the session, we'll find out a little bit more about the impact of devolution. That's the aim. And the implications of the English Devolution White Paper and what it means for strategic authorities and local government. The session is going to be split into two parts: sharing, kind of the info session, and questions. And at 3 o'clock, we'll have smaller groups, breakouts, which will provide an opportunity for you to discuss between yourselves, small groups, about the impact for you as an organisation, consortium, individual, and have the opportunity to maybe formulate some questions which you can then relay back at about 3:20 when we come back into the main room. The session is recorded, and you can view or share this next week with BSL interpretation and captions, and we'll notify you as well when it's up on the platform. There'll be a simple, very simple, short evaluation at the end, so we hope you can stay right at the end. It's only about a minute with a few questions. Just start to show my slides. There you go. So next slide. As you can see, that's the agenda for today. And I'll stop sharing here and allow Paul to introduce himself and open up his own slides.
Great, thank you, Kate. Hi, everybody. My name's Paul Bristow. I'm a white man in my late 40s. I'm wearing a blue shirt. I've got glasses, and I'm currently sitting in the Arts Council's Newcastle office. I'm also joined by my colleague Lee today. So, Lee, I just wondered whether you could just introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone. I'm Lee Hornsby, so I work closely with Paul at Arts Council England across this area that we'll be talking about today. I'm a white male. I'm in my mid to late 30s and I'm wearing a light brown shirt and I'm sat in my bedroom in Manchester.
Great, thanks, Lee. So Lee and I will take you through a presentation today, and then it's an opportunity, I think, for anybody to ask us questions, and then an opportunity for colleagues to discuss. So am I a co-host? It's not letting me share. There we go. Brilliant. So everybody just bears with me while I get my screen ready. Sorry, I'm actually going to stop sharing and do this more effectively. So if you just bear with me a moment. Can colleagues see this presentation?
We can indeed. Thank
So
you,
you're
Paul.
not at the first. You're not at the first slide. So let me see if I can make that work better. Apologies.
Just, Paul, when you press slideshow, if you can see slideshow, if you just press from beginning, the top left button.
Yeah. Here we go. Tell you what, I'm gonna go back in and start again. Apologies, everybody, for my incompetence here. Nope, it doesn't like that. I'll try again. How's that? Brilliant. Okay. So, as Kate's saying, Lee and I are here today to talk to you about devolution. There's lots happening with devolution, and lots of people are asking lots of questions about it. So we're going to talk to you about what devolution is. We're going to talk to you about what's happening in England regarding devolution. And then we're going to talk to you about what devolution means for culture. But we hope that we're just not going to talk at you on that. We'd like to open up some questions because I think it was Donald Dewar who said devolution is a process, not an event. So there are lots of future developments to think about, and we're keen to hear from participants on this call about what they might be from their experience. And I think it's one of those things as well that devolution is something that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. Devolution, devolved politicians, lots of things about devolution have pierced our consciousness for a while. Some of the most famous politicians in the UK have come to prominence through devolution. So clearly Ken Livingstone in London, but also Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland. And neither of these pictures were chosen to show them in any particular light, but they were popular leaders who were elected multiple times and in many ways defined themselves against their national government, but also were clearly recognised as personalities beyond politics as well. So devolution is something that has really impacted upon our culture and upon our lives. We might think about devolution in terms of institutions. So devolution are organization. Devolution is about organizations. It's about power being found in certain institutions rather than others. And often those institutions are in big buildings. So when we think about devolution, we talk about places like Holyrood, or in the two examples here, Cardiff with the Welsh Senedd and Stormont, where the Northern Ireland Assembly is based. But we also think about some of those international figures who have been involved in leading authorities and institutions which have had a high profile and have a high profile internationally, not just within their own countries. So the top image there is Anne Hidalgo, who is the mayor of Paris, and what she's doing there is where she really came to international prominence during the run up to the last Olympics. So the mayor of Paris was a prominent figure, and in swimming in the Seine, she wanted to demonstrate that the river was safe to hold the triathlon and other water events in the Olympics. And then the other image is, of course, the Terminator, who was the governor of California. And while California is probably a state in a federal rather than a devolved arrangement, clearly, another example of an international figure with profile and name and visual recognition from their position as a non-national leader. So what do we mean by devolution? It's not a verb, devolve is a verb, but it is about action and change. And I think the dictionary definition is worth coming to. So this idea that it's an act of devolving powers, functions and funding from national government to national assemblies, regional government and local authorities. So the theory behind this, I suppose, is that power is a finite concept, and if you have it, then someone else doesn't. But we want to see in where devolution takes place, power moving from one level, the national level, to a geography below the level of the nation state. And in doing this, you create new powers, you create new structures, you create new institutions, you create the ability to get things done at a geographic level that is lower than that of the country in which you live. And that can be quite disruptive. So we've seen in Scotland, conflict between the UK government and the Scottish government in Holyrood. But we've also seen that within England as well, where some of the mayors have picked fights with central government, as we saw during COVID. But that difference, that creation of the new creates potential, and that's some of the things that Lee and I want to talk about today. I think we also want to say that devolution isn't new. So I'm going to take you back on a journey to 1886. It was quite an important year in culture. One of the, I think possibly the best novel written in the 19th century, The Mayor of Casterbridge by Thomas Hardy, appeared. It was the last Impressionist exhibition in Paris, and Georges Seurat exhibited this famous work of his. It was a time of ferment and change in culture. But it was also a time of ferment and change in politics, and it set the tone for some of the things that we see now in devolution. So 1886, lots of things happening culturally and happening in the arts, but also William Gladstone brought a Home Rule Bill for Ireland to Parliament for the first time. So throughout the 19th century, UK governments had been trying to wrestle with the challenges of governing Ireland. There'd been lots of political violence. There'd been the Great Famine. And the Liberal Party under Gladstone decided the best way to deal with this was, in effect, give Ireland devolution. So introduced a Home Rule Bill for Ireland, which would have set up an Irish Parliament, which would have been responsible for all domestic affairs in Ireland, while the Imperial Parliament in Westminster would have retained responsibility for foreign affairs and defence and things like that. And over time, proposals for home rule in Ireland became proposals for home rule all round, so that if you were to have a home rule parliament for Ireland, you should also have a home rule parliament in England, Scotland and Wales. So in effect, the government at the time came to a proposal for devolution across the whole country. It failed. The Home Rule Bill didn't pass in 1886. It took until 1914 for Home Rule to be granted to Ireland. And then the First World War happened and Home Rule never took place. But I think it shows that question of how you find the right balance of power between national government and the regional and local levels isn't something new, and devolution has been a solution that has been reached for in this country for at least 139 years, and probably longer if you go back into history. So, getting a bit closer in time now, but still a bit of a history lesson. What about devolution in the UK? In 1997, the Labour government introduced devolution to what became known as the devolved administrations in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And there were elections to assemblies and parliaments in each of these places. To Northern Ireland in 1998 following the Good Friday Agreement, and to the Scottish Parliament and Welsh Assembly, now the Welsh Senedd, in 1999. But there was also devolution within England. So the London Mayor and Greater London Assembly saw their first elections in the year 2000. And as with home rule all round a century before, government wanted to see devolution across the whole of England alongside London as well. So the government legislated for a referendum for the 8 remaining English regions outside of London for themselves to set up regional assemblies. They wouldn't have had mayors, but they would have had directly elected regional assemblies. And these directly elected regional assemblies would have had cultural powers. But there was only one referendum. I'm sitting in Newcastle now. The people around me decided by 78% against 22% that they didn't want a regional assembly, and that was on a 48% turnout, which was higher than a lot of local elections. And after that, the government didn't push regional assemblies in England anymore. Now, culture is affected by politics. Cultural policy is public policy, and politicians make decisions on culture. So culture has been affected by devolution. And just a quick case study of how that's come about in the devolved administrations by looking at Scotland. The legislation which set out the powers of the Scottish Parliament, the Scotland Act 1998, divided the powers between Scotland and the Westminster Parliament in terms of reserve matters, which were clearly defined and were reserved to the UK Parliament at Westminster, and devolved matters, which were transferred to the Scottish Parliament. And that was pretty much everything that wasn't defined within the list of reserve matters. So culture was very, very much a responsibility of the Scottish government in terms of arts and culture. And the way that we can see this operating is that the model which we've kind of had in across the UK since the end of the last war, where you have arm's length bodies, Arts Council of Great Britain as the first one, which leads cultural policy but also allocates funding. That model was then replicated in Scotland. So Creative Scotland, very much equivalent of Arts Council England, allocates money from the National Lottery and the Scottish Government into the arts sector and the creative industries, and operates as an arm's length body in the sense that we've seen very much and we're very much familiar with. But as I said, we've had devolution in England. We keep talking about devolution in England like it's something new, but we are 25 years in, quarter of a century of devolution in England with the London Mayor, and the London Mayor does have a statutory duty under the legislation which set up the Greater London Authority to prepare a cultural strategy and to consult with bodies on arts and cultural policy, like the Arts Council, as appropriate. And this gives the mayor powers to support and promote arts and culture. And the Mayor of London has done this, all the mayors of London have done this in various ways, from things like the London Borough of Culture programme to supporting creative enterprise zones to the Fourth Plinth, and has been quite active in terms of culture and supporting culture. But the mayor can also support arts and culture through the wider powers that they have. For example, planning. The mayor sets a strategic planning framework for London through the London Plan. So planning in terms of spatial planning, how you build things and how you do development. And that's quite an important lever to pull for culture when you think about planning for cultural infrastructure or for creative workspace. Those wider powers of the mayor are really important for culture. And over time, the mayor has strengthened their relationship with the Arts Council and is directly involved in the decision-making of the Arts Council. So the Mayor of London appoints the chair of Arts Council England's London Area Council, as well as 4 other members of that body. And it is worth remembering it's a quarter of a century of devolution within England and its impact on culture, and we should probably do more to think about that and what we can learn from it. But outside of London, we haven't seen devolution. We see local government and we see national government, but we don't see that regional tier of government that you see in London. I don't want to call Wales, Scotland, or Northern Ireland regions. I've got in trouble for that before. But you do see that elsewhere in Europe, where regional government's a really important part of how things get done. And it is quite a centralised country. I think all parties and all recognise that. And that it's been recognised as well by both by parties of all governments of all parties that the centralisation of policy in England has constricted economic growth. So there has been a desire and an ambition to devolve over time. Nothing happened from 2004 until the coalition came in, but the coalition took a different track from regional assemblies. They came up with the idea of the combined authority, where groups of local authorities would come together to kind of create a super authority over the top of those local authorities. And government was really clear that what they wanted there was an elected mayor as the form of governance. Greater Manchester became the first combined authority in 2014. They're called combined authorities because they're groups of local authorities. There was one devolution deal that went to one local authority on its own, Cornwall, in 2015. But in the main, the ambition was for combined authorities and that mayoral combined authority approach, the MCA. And the first mayors were elected in May 2017 across Tees Valley, Liverpool, West of England, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and the West Midlands. And the way devolution progressed was through individual deals which were negotiated by those combined authorities with the government. So what did that mean for culture? Powers were devolved to combined authorities. For example, the Greater Manchester Combined Authority had health powers devolved to it. But combined authorities don't require devolution of new powers to be able to act on culture. As with local authorities, they have general powers of competence and well-being, and this enables them to act around culture. And their focus has primarily so far been on local economic growth, and this has shaped kind of the deals they struck with government and some of the things that they were asking for. But that doesn't mean they haven't been interested in culture. So 3 of the deals that were struck before 2021 included culture. Tees Valley, Liverpool City region, and Cornwall. But in time, all of the mayoral combined authorities began acting in this area. And I think that reflects how important the creative industries have become in terms of a vision of how local economies and the national economy can change. And since 2022, all of the deals that have been struck have included culture. One deal didn't. That was the East Midlands. But I think if you look at how the East Midlands and the new East Midlands mayor is operating, very, very much an interesting culture there. And that MCA is now developing its strategic approach. And the Arts Council was involved in negotiations as a third party. So it wasn't anything other than a negotiation between the combined authority and the government. But we were in the room when those discussions took place with DCMS because we wanted to be a good partner for the combined authorities, but also in terms of acting as DCMS's expert voice around museums, libraries and the arts. So this is what it's looking like now. Devolution sped up, I mentioned after 2022 from the Levelling Up White Paper. You've got more deals, you've got more mayoralties, and now 60% of England's population is covered by a combined authority with the mayor. There are 14 mayoral authorities, including the GLA, and we're expecting 7 mayoral elections to come next year. And where there aren't at the moment combined authorities ready to have mayoral elections, plans are afoot in many, many places to think about how they can be taken forward. I think at this stage I'm going to hand over to Lee.
Yes, you are
So
still on that,
slides. I'll do the slides for you, Lee, shall I?
still on that previous slide, actually, Paul.
Yeah.
Great. So yeah, I'm going to talk everyone through the English Devolution White Paper and some of the detail that was in there. So it was on the previous slide. So before the last general election, both of the main parties in terms of Conservatives and Labour were very clear that they wanted to push on with devolution in some way, shape or form. And we got the first real indication of what the direction of travel Labour wanted to go in post-election back in December in 2024. So they published their white paper on English devolution, which essentially set out the direction of travel and some of the kind of technical things and changes they want to implement. And much of this is kind of underway. But I just wanted to talk you through some of these details which will be relevant. So first of all, just to explain the 3 T's of strategic authority. So Paul was talking about combined authorities, and that is, as he said, a collection of local authorities that form up the constituents of a combined authority. Government's changing the terminology a little bit and kind of broadening it out and referring to those same bodies as strategic authorities, which is a bit more expansive. It's kind of a terminology thing. It's not worth worrying about too much. But the actual types of those strategic authorities do differ. So in the white paper, they explain 3 different tiers of those strategic authorities. So one is a foundation strategic authority. So that would be, in theory, on paper, a non-mayoral combined authority or combined county authority or designated local authorities that don't have a mayor. And then there'll be mayoral strategic authorities. So those combined authorities who do have a directly elected mayor. And then there'll be the top tier, which is established mayoral strategic authorities. So those are the more mature mayoral combined authorities that meet specific criteria. They've been established for 18 months or more. And importantly, those established mayoral strategic authorities will be eligible to receive integrated settlements. And I'll tell you a little bit about what an integrated settlement actually is. So the idea is that it is a flexible long-term funding model for those strategic authorities, and they've started to be rolled out from the beginning of this financial year in West Midlands and Greater Manchester, but that will be rolled out more expansively, and they were announced in the spending review recently. So the idea is that those flexible long-term funding models and pot of money that offers those strategic authorities more autonomy over how they spend the money they get allocated from central government. And there will be certain things in place so accountability and assurance frameworks, but ultimately it's around giving those places, those mayors and those strategic authorities more control over how they spend that money which they're allocated via formula from central government to be able to meet their aims for their regions and their responsibilities that they have across those regions. So the idea is that that's a real signifier of that deeper level of devolution. And some mayors, want to see that go further. But for now, that's kind of the way it's looking. And yeah, as I mentioned, the spending review also announced that some more of those established mayoral strategic authorities are going to get those integrated settlements from the beginning of the next spending period, which will be from 2026 and onwards. I'll speak a little bit around areas of competence in the devolution framework on a slide coming up. So I just want to very quickly, while I'm here and it's listed, just quickly cover off local government reorganisation, which some of you may also be familiar with, is quite live at the moment. So the details of reorganisation were also outlined in the white paper too. So there's this parallel programme of reorganisation happening, so where two-tier areas are expected to transition into unitary authorities. And the general guidance rule of thumb from government is that those areas should have around 500,000 in terms of the population that they serve. So that's looking like at the moment around 21 of those upper tier authorities will be reorganised, and those discussions and proposals are already well underway in those places as well. And government are keen to say and communicate out to the sector that reorganisation mustn't delay or block devolution, and in fact, hopefully might speed it up or speed along the process and make it more streamlined. So, for example, in Surrey, they're working to quite a tight reorganisation timeline at the moment, so they can push on with devolution, and which they've been working on for several years. They actually had a deal with the previous government on the table. So yeah, it varies from place to place, but reorganisation is happening and happening in tangent with devolution in a lot of places as well. Next slide, please, Paul. Thanks. So yeah, I just wanted to cover the areas of competence and just so in the white paper, so what our strategic authorities are actually responsible for. So the white paper tries to set out what are the actual technical responsibilities that we expect strategic authorities to deliver. So it'll be a legally defined list of these areas of competence, which will form the core of their powers and areas of responsibility. And these will eventually become law via the English Devolution Bill when it passes, which I think we'll come back to a little bit later as well. So these are the areas that are in the white paper. Roughly, they sit across. There's a big focus on driving economic growth underneath all of these areas of competence, but also supporting public service more widely in the regions that they're in and adding strategic coordination and value to things. So yeah, I won't read out the 7 areas which are defined. But hopefully you can maybe start to infer that culture obviously is not a distinct area of competence, but policy and potentially funding interventions, like Paul was saying, some strategic authorities and combined authorities have and already do think about their cultural strategies and their places and the things that they can do and the levers that they can pull that sit in amongst these areas of competence, particularly around economic development, particularly around skills, particularly around health and well-being as well. So there's multiple points of integration there. Next slide, please, Paul. So very quickly on the devolution framework. So this is a table that's set out in the actual white paper itself, which essentially lists the type of powers and more technical interventions and areas of responsibility that strategic authorities will have. So this is the replacement of the deal structure that was in place before. So different regions might come to government with different ideas of what they want to have devolved, and there'll be different tiers that they could go in at. So this new framework is essentially the entry point. So this is available by default rather than by deal, and that's how the white paper frames it. So the framework looks to clarify functions and governance with strategic authorities linked to those areas of competence, like I mentioned, so that things like skills and employment support, so listing out what areas of responsibility and powers strategic authorities will have. So, for example, in skills, strategic authorities will co-own local skills improvement plans along with employer representative bodies. Within economic development and regeneration, which is the table you can see on this slide, there's commitment to partnership working with DCMS arm's length bodies, and that obviously includes Arts Council England and others, but other bodies as well, like UKRI. So think about how research and innovation can be a driver for economic growth in place as well. And also you can then start to draw lines around how culture can maybe fit in and drive other areas of the agenda within the framework, like across health. Even think about transport, think about housing and regeneration as well. Yeah, so next slide, please, Paul. Great. So this is kind of where we are. So that was a whistle-stop tour of the white paper itself and the details that are within, and the direction of travel. So I mentioned the devolution bill. So that white paper is not technically law yet. So that's the next stage of this. So making sure that those areas of competence are enshrined in law, and strategic authorities are really clear on what they're responsible for and on the hook for. So we're expecting that English Devolution Bill to be started being drafted next month, and that it'll pass in 2026. So that's some of those things that I was just going over will become official, will become law. We've kind of already covered this. There's devolution is growing at pace, particularly over the last few years. So there's newly established mayoralties, with more expected next year through the devolution priority programme, and that number will continue to rise. We expect government are really keen to get to 100% coverage across the board. We're also seeing existing mayors. They're setting their priorities, their ambitions across their regions, and they will continue to grow as they become more established, and especially when they start setting out their local growth plans, which I'll come to in a sec. But thinking about mayors like Andy Burnham in Manchester and Steve Rotherham in Liverpool and others. So those regions and those mayors that have a really clear vision, and we'll start seeing more of that as well unfold over time. Alongside that as well, and kind of running in tangent, is an increasingly long-term vision coming from central government, not just for devolution itself, but also how that links into wider policies as well, such as the industrial strategy, which was published on Monday this week. And within that industrial strategy, there's there's sector plans for 8 growth driving industries, of which the creative industries are one as well, and where arts and culture are featured quite heavily throughout, as being important to achieving the ambitions within those sector plans. And then again, local growth plans, which strategic authorities will be developing, which will be a 10-year plan to drive growth in their regions. And the idea is that all those things will and should talk to each other. So hypothetically, Greater Manchester's local growth plan will have links into the creative industry sector plan and into the wider industrial strategy, and more broadly other government policy as well that is relevant to their places. And just very quickly, there's 6 regions in particular that we expect to be quite active and be prioritising creative industries and by extension arts and culture as well within their activity, within their local growth plans, and they'll actually be receiving a share of 150 million, which was also announced in some of the industrial strategy pots of money earlier this week. So those 6, just for reference, are the North East, Greater Manchester, Liverpool City region, West Yorkshire, the West Midlands, the West of England, and London is a priority region too, but they're not in the mix for that additional money. But government are keen to make sure that they're prioritised, because obviously it is still quite a big hub for arts, culture, and the wider creative industries as well. Next slide, please, Paul. Yeah, so I've kind of touched on this a little bit already. So I've mentioned that those priority regions and being a real key delivery asset for government for their industrial strategy and for creative industries growth. That 150 million is the Creative Places Growth Fund, which I've just mentioned as well. So those strategic authorities will have flexibility and plans on how they want to use that money in their regions to grow the sector. There's also a couple of other things of note that are worth being aware of as well. So the idea of creative corridors, so how those different regions across England can work across boundaries, particularly in the north where there's a real concentration of strategic authorities, so how they can all coordinate and kind of work with each other to maximize their impacts in those places. And then similarly, there was an announcement around more creative clusters, so money via UKRI for different places across the country to invest in particularly innovative areas, and that will touch on our sectors as well in different places, although the detail's not out there yet. And next slide, Paul, which I think is my last one, I'll hand back to you. Yeah, I think this is just to note that economic growth is definitely the driver for a lot of what strategic authorities will be talking about and what they want to do, and how all of those different areas of competence can contribute to that. So thinking outside of our box for a while, they're getting increasingly across transport and infrastructure. So how can they maximize their public transport systems to enable more people to get to work, find new jobs? So it kind of touches across and links across various different areas, but they do have a responsibility more broadly than that. So thinking about the well-being of their places and the people that live within them, they will all be, and the ambitions from mayor to mayor will vary, and the stories that they tell and the things they want to achieve will be nuanced, and it's just worth being across that. So there are two quotes there from Richard Parker in the West Mids and Kim McGuinness, who talk around our sectors and what we do in the context of improving people's lives, which I think is important to note as well moving forward. I think I'm handing back to you now, Paul.
Great, thank you, Lee. I can't move the slide on. There we go. So as Lee was saying, the ambitions of mayors are significant, and they're primarily, but not strictly, economic. And we expect that broader interest in what culture and the creative industries can bring to develop over time. But there's already things that mayors are doing with their new powers around devolution, and it's really beginning to be a set of activities which are strong and moving out into really speaking to the value that culture brings to the life of places and to the lives of communities, and is creating an evidence base and an understanding of good practice, and also an understanding of what mayors can do and combined authorities, strategic authorities can do that can't be done by other tiers of government. So just a few examples here. Greater Manchester Combined Authority have been, because they've had some public health responsibilities devolved to them, have been looking at how they can exploit the potential of the cultural sector in their area to support creative health initiatives. In terms of placemaking, Liverpool City Region, through the Borough of Culture competition, have been focusing attention on particular parts of the city region. So I think the Wirral, most recent Liverpool City Region Borough of Culture, and giving them a chance to really put themselves in the spotlight in terms of the cultural offer of particular places. Other combined authorities are thinking about new ways of involving people. So the West of England Combined Authority have for a number of years had a clear strategy around the creative industries and their support for the creative industries in the cultural sector within that. But they're moving on now to think about how they can involve the voice of citizens within setting priorities and thinking about what delivery looks like, and experimenting with the Citizens Assembly for Culture across the Combined Authority geography. And in London, where you've had 25 years of devolution, 25 years of people working on culture at that regional level, sitting alongside people working in planning, that creates the potential for the GA to support planners to think about how they develop cultural infrastructure across the city. And looking at some of this practice, looking at the ambition of mayors, and looking at where we began this conversation, which was very much about the disruption that devolution introduces and yet the potential that creates. Let's start thinking about devolution as an opportunity. It's a rewiring of the system, and it's a chance for us all to think about how we can do more and to do it better. So it's a chance for us to think, and this is what the Arts Council is very much doing at the moment, alongside our partners in combined authorities and strategic authorities, and with local government, crucially with local government, thinking about how we can all best work together in a system which will leverage the strengths of operating nationally, regionally, and locally. So sitting at a national level, government in DCMS, but also arm's length bodies from the arts, like the Arts Council, can help set national strategy to make sure it plugs into those important broader national strategic priorities like the industrial strategy. We can bring sector expertise and understanding of what our sector is about, but also the ability to invest at scale, which often doesn't exist locally. Then we've got a new tier of government at that regional level through mayoral strategic authorities, an ability to provide strategic leadership, political strategic leadership over a geography that's more meaningful for the economy of a place. But also the chance to intervene strategically, to take action that can drive change at a sectoral level, but also within particular locations. But thinking again about the importance of what happens locally, the role of local government within this, representing communities, having a deep understanding of communities, but playing that key role in delivering public services and in shaping places. I think the opportunity in front of us is to think about how we can get the value of these three tiers, to find the best ways of working, to rewire the system so that we're producing better outcomes and we're doing it most effectively. And the Arts Council is thinking hard about how we need to change. Quick quote from the white paper, a very clear injunction from government here, which was that funding bodies like the Arts Council in England will be asked to reconfigure how they work. We're absolutely up for thinking about what that reconfiguring will be. We want to work with partners nationally, regionally, and locally so that the system works and it works in ways that benefit the public. And we're working hard with strategic authorities, mayoral strategic authorities at the moment. So we're formally looking at new ways to work, formal ways of working with strategic authorities. We've recently signed an MOU with the West Midlands Combined Authority, which sets out how we will engage with them alongside the other DCMS ALBs, and to use that to begin to shape our partnership with them into the future. And we see putting in place these kind of arrangements, it will enable strategic authorities and ourselves to begin to identify those shared strategic priorities where we can collaborate, and then to think about what those opportunities for collaboration might look like practically and begin to take that through into delivery in partnership. There are a number of examples about where we're working closely with combined authorities, strategic authorities at the moment to do that into the future. And we want to be more in that position of doing more of those things. But thinking again back to that question of how we rewire the system, we've got different capacities to bring. So the more we work together, the more we try to deliver in partnership, the more we will learn about what are the specific values that you're able to bring together, and to think moving into the future about what a rewired system might look like. But it might be a challenge to the status quo. And we've got some political voices out there over the last few years who have been talking very, very much about a step change through devolution, how this country works, and thinking about how that relates to culture. And it's come from well-established political figures like Gordon Brown, who was commissioned by the Labour Party to look at the governance of the UK. And it's come from the mayors themselves, who really want to give themselves greater capacity to make decisions that matter for their locations. And this is another dynamic of change which we will all be managing as we move forward into the future. So devolution is going to bring change. There'll be challenges that come from that. We think these challenges are also going to be opportunities. And the question for us is not just how we as the Arts Council should respond, but how we as the sector should respond. We're really keen to hear from you about some of your questions and some of the things you'd like to know more about. But we're also keen to hear from you about how we make the most of this opportunity. You don't get the chance very often to rewire the system to make it work better. And devolution does present that opportunity. There's huge opportunities for the cultural sector within this. The Arts Council is absolutely committed to making sure that they work for the people that of this country and for the cultural sector. And we're really keen to talk to you now about how we can do that. So thank you very much for listening to Lee and myself.
Thank you so much, Paul and Lee. That was really informative and so helpful. I've got some questions, but I think if we look at the chat and let kind of open it out to everyone else, that would be fantastic. So everyone, please feel free to just raise your hand and either just raise it, probably be by or just join in. And there's all the alternative. Just put your question in the chat. And we have a question already there from Claire Gulliver. So I might try, Paul and Lee, to throw it open to you for a response. Claire asks, really keen to understand where the prioritisation of 7 mayoral strategic authorities for creative industries leaves the rest of us.
Shall I kick off, Lee, on that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a prioritisation which has been made by government. So I think the get off the hook answer from the Arts Council here is that this is a question for the government, not us. But I think it's worth noting that within the sector plan, there is a commitment to think about the creative industries clusters across the whole country. So these are places which have been prioritised because they have the greatest potential to contribute to growth within the creative industry. So therefore, government has said these are the places which will receive a share of that 150 million support. But government is also saying there is growth potential elsewhere in the country. And I think over the coming months, we want to see how that will play out in terms of how that support will develop. I think from the Arts Council perspective, I think what we should recognise, and from the cultural sector perspective, what we should recognise here is that this is about creative industry sector growth within the broader industrial strategy. So it is about picking winners. It's about saying these are the places and these are the sectors which will be prioritised to drive growth. The Arts Council's mission, while we want to help support that growth, is broader than just supporting growth. We want to see cultural opportunity wherever you are in the country and whoever you are. So our work will continue to be about everybody in all parts of the country.
Yeah, and just more broader than that as well. And again, not one directly for the Arts Council, but maybe just worth being aware of. Do some announcements in the spending review that government has intent to invest in places that have maybe been underserved, not specifically around culture, but they're thinking about those neighbourhoods in areas that are maybe more deprived or left behind. So there's other opportunities outside of the industrial strategy for our sectors to be involved in. So thinking about the plan for neighbourhoods, which is via the MHCLG. So a lot of those places have aspirations to improve their places with arts and culture at the heart of some of those regeneration plans. So yeah, it's not just as kind of narrow as the industrial strategy. There's other policy out there that will benefit the sector, and we'll be alive to all of those.
Thank you, Lee. We have another question as well in the chat, which is from, I think, Claire Dixon from Dorset Museum and Art Gallery, who asks, what do you know about the investment in museums where cultural funding has already been devolved? For example, is it focused on civic institutions or more broad?
So I'm guessing you mean within the UK or internationally. I mean, I think there's one thing to say on that, which is that cultural funding is to a great extent already devolved in that local government spends money on culture. And so we're not in a situation where it's all about cultural funding in this country, as you know from clearly the Dorset example. Cultural funding is at the national level, and there's got to be some kind of step change to provide funding that goes out locally. I think within the UK we do have examples where the new devolved administrations have funded particular institutions, and that's happened in London, for instance. So the Museum of London has been funded by the Mayor of London, and I think you can make an argument that falls within the remit of a civic museum. I think internationally, I think that I'm not sure of any particular examples where there's a particular focus on particular types of museums over others. So I'm not sure I can point to anything there. But I also would observe that within the UK, the National Museums of Scotland and Wales, they are part of the devolved of devolution. The administrations there are responsible for them.
Thanks, Paul. We have another question from Mia from Rambert. In the touring dance sector, there is a concern that devolution could negatively impact touring companies that work regionally but need national oversight. Is there anything within devolution that could speak to this?
So I think where I was talking about the rewiring of the system, absolutely, this is where we're talking about a key role for the Arts Council. So that national oversight and that understanding of the subsectors within the arts and cultural sector is fundamental to us getting some of this right. And that's a conversation that we've been having with strategic authorities as they've been thinking about how they develop their response to devolution and their ambitions around culture. And I think one of the things that we'd like to do is to explore how, as we move into a future, into a rewired system, and things might look a little bit different, how the Arts Council continues to play that important role as we go ahead. But absolutely, I think that the risk that you've raised there, Mia, is one that's well understood, and quite a lot of people are talking about, and it's a conversation I've heard outside of the dance sector as well. I think other art forms, this has been something which has been raised.
Thanks. And then one last question for the moment. Oh, there might be another one as well. From Maddie from DLWP, which I'm presuming is Delavar Pavilion. Correct me if I'm wrong. Within the culture creative sector, not mentioned as priority areas for mayors, we're concerned about the potential of having a mayor that doesn't use the budget creatively to give money to our sector. Will Arts Council be talking with every mayor to get them to think about culture? Or is it dependent on whether the chosen mayors want to talk about culture?
So we will talk to all the mayors. We are talking to all the mayors at the moment. And that's really a really important role for the Arts Council to advocate for and provide leadership for the cultural sector. We will continue to do that. But I think there's a little bit of a reality for us, which is that it is about devolution, and devolution means difference and local choice. And in some places, greater priority will be put on the cultural sector by some mayors than others, and we'll just have to deal with that variety as we move on. Our commitment to supporting people to lead fulfilling creative lives wherever they live remains. We are a national development agency, and that is important to us. And national means we take the whole country into consideration as we do that. In terms of what that means for their budgets, I think it's important to say they're not getting new money to do culture. So it's not as if there's an extra pot of money which will be for culture, which they then decide to put into something else. When Lee was talking about the competencies and the integrated settlements that some of the mayors will get, they're getting money to spend on those competencies. They're not getting money to spend on arts and culture. So it's not as if they're going to be losing cash in the way that it might be that if we saw cuts being made by a local authority which had previously supported culture.
Right. There's a flurry now of questions. We might have to use some of these questions in the breakouts and then come back to them. But Carola from Arts and Higher Education has asked, has Arts Council considered how to manage devolution in relation to cultural compacts? And I'm particularly concerned about a possible future where larger strategic authorities, for example, Birmingham, Cardiff, represent the new magnets as London is. But now they potentially affect the second order regions, such as Stoke-on-Trent, Crewe. Can we use cultural compacts to devolve to that level rather than just the next level down? Does that?
I think it's a good question as we move forward. I mean, at the moment, you could devolution is it's taking power from the centre and giving it to a subnational tier. So at the moment, devolution is happening to strategic authorities. That's what devolution is. In the future, I think there are questions about how we all respond to the geographies and places and communities that are below that. I think there is an important role for cultural compacts within that to represent interests, places, and communities, and they can represent them to strategic authorities and to mayors as much as they can to other bodies. So I think it's a good question for which I don't have the answer, but it's worth us asking and thinking about as we move forward.
Yeah, thanks, Carola. Claire Atherton asks, with the planned devolution happening in the new 2026 locations, are you aware of how the funding will be prioritised? For example, are they looking to replicate creative health, placemaking, or inclusion as in the established areas, or will that be the choice of the new mayors for these locations?
I think you've been closer to these conversations than me, Lee. So I might.
I think it's because government have standardized or will standardize the approach, so that devolution framework I was talking around in terms of the things that they're responsible for directly, I think that will dictate what their priorities are around that. So they will have their own ambitions and their own priorities, but it will still be within a framework, and that they have to work with and work around. So that even though there will be more wiggle room for those new areas, it will still be within set parameters by government. So it's not they haven't been told these new areas go forth and spend this money however you wish. It's still with certain strings attached. So but again, as Paul was saying earlier, we're actively having those conversations and trying to figure out what those priorities are with those new places as they emerge as well, which we'll continue to stay close to because we have a vested interest in it, obviously.
Thanks, Lee. This is a bit of a follow-up as well from Thomas Mason. He just asks, how will devolution affect kind of our priority place work and creative people and places? Do we know?
There's no plans for devolution to change it. So if you think about creative people and places, it's done by identifying locations at a local authority level, by data used at a local authority level. So I think it's important to say the Arts Council will be responding to much more than just those kind of regional strategic authorities. We will continue to respond at a place level, whether the kind of scale of the place is appropriate to the thing that needs to be done. So if you're thinking about maximising economic impact of the cultural sector as part of the broader creative industries, absolutely, we're going to be talking to a strategic authority and to the mayor about their local growth plan. If we're thinking about interventions at a smaller scale, at a smaller geographic level, we will continue to do that with the partners who are providing leadership in those places. And I think it's really important to say, which I know wasn't in your question, but local government is still an absolutely fundamental partner for the Arts Council in everything that we're trying to do. This isn't about suddenly our focus is on strategic authorities to the exclusion of local government. They will be operating in different ways to do different things, and the Arts Council will flex depending on who its partner is.
Thank you, Paul. Just one other before we break out. Claire Hickey, should a lot of growth conversations focus on creative industries, but where does the art specifically fit within this when so much focus is on economic impact, gaming, digital design, film, for example, those that can easily justify their financial impact and not the wider social benefits that arts brings to communities.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth us noting that the primary kind of motivation for mayors in strategic authorities is to develop their local economies, and that will determine to a very great extent how we shape our discussions with them, especially at the moment where they're responding to an industrial strategy and they've got a requirement on them to produce local growth plans. But as Lee was setting out, mayors have broader ambitions, and over time, it will be an increasing driver for them to think about some of those broader social impacts. And there's already some really good practice that mayors are leading, which we will want to support them on and think about how that learning and understanding can be shared elsewhere. And I think the West of England Citizens Assembly, which is absolutely not in the space of growing particular niche parts of the creative industries, but engaging local people across that combined authority and setting priorities for the broader cultural sector, gives an indication of perhaps a direction of travel there. These are all really new. We've had less than a decade of strategic authorities and combined authorities. There's a lot that's going to happen.
Thanks, Paul and Lee. Right, we'll stop there just so we have enough time for conversations. I will just close there. Thank you. And for those questions that weren't answered, we can try and come back to them at the end. So please note, we'll do our best. I'm just going to stop recording for the moment. Thank you. Is that Carola?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll let Paul
wonder
or
if
Lee.
this is the interpreter. If somebody's is going to say something, I wonder if they might say their name, just so that, or you say it at the end, Kate, as you did. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Is there any? Oh, sorry, Paul.
I was just going to say, I think that reflects some of the things that Lee and I were talking about in terms of the opportunity to rewire the system. It's rewiring the system around place. So there is leadership around a particular geography. That leadership will be doing certain things that enables us to respond to it and think about everything that we bring to the party. And I think that's the opportunity we'd like to exploit.
Thank you. Is there any other feedback? Well, not to worry if not, but feel free to, you can put it in the chat or just email us afterwards.
Can I mention another one? It's me, Carola, again, but the one thing that we also mentioned on is that there is potentially a hierarchy of sizes, which then affects a hierarchy of investment, which might potentially create, again, some inequality. So there was a bit of discussions around that. And because, of course, there are different levels, and these different levels then create a quotation mark, a hierarchy.
Thank you. Thank you, Carola. I'm just looking as well in the chat. Sorry, I'm just trying to see if there's anything else further coming up. So Claire as well, Gulliver said, we had a good chat about the challenges for large geographic areas in coming together when they're dispersed. For example, Hereford, Devon and Norfolk.
Yes, I think that just that area is I think most organisations, arts, cultural organisations in sparsely populated counties and regions will be watching carefully the priorities of new combined authorities, and also local government reorganisation. Historically, in many areas, has been hugely politically sensitive and where some of those new alliances, in order to bump up the resident numbers, where that ends is going to be a quite an interesting one, and probably quite a lively local process as well. In our group, I referenced the unhappy marriage many years ago between Herefordshire and Worcestershire, and that still looms large in some people's memories.
Thank you, Nick. It's all really interesting and very relevant. If there's anything further as well, you can feel free again to follow up with conversations. So I think we'll end there and just say thank you so much for you all for coming along to our session today. But thank you so much to Paul and to Lee for taking us through this very, as we talked about, an introduction, the first stage of a little bit about devolution and the impact for us as a cultural sector and beyond. I have